Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. With TBC confirmed, it's about time we did a little bit of a class update. Let's take a look back at each class in the Burning Crusade, their performance overall, and hopefully help you make your choice moving forwards. We will be looking at what's new in terms of talents and abilities, leveling, PvE, who's the new king of the meta, PvP has much changed, and tier sets which actually exist for every specialization now. And through this I hope to answer, is your class any better now? First through the portal, the hottest healer on the market, the most mobile class in the game, and the tank that puts the word thick into thick, the Druid. Well, we have to begin this somewhere, and I'm going for the Druid. Why Druid? I think out of every class, if I had to give some kind of most improved award out, it's gonna go to our furry friends. The love this class got from Blizzard moving from Classic to the Burning Crusade is nothing short of enormous. No longer are you prevented from using your hots because of world buffs, no longer are you in the shadow of warriors as a tank, no longer are the DPS specs totally memed on, both bringing very valuable assets to your raid team. I think I want to start by going over a few things when I looked at the Druid back during the Was It Any Good Though videos, being that Druids are the true embodiment of a jack of all trade, master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. Well in WoW unfortunately this doesn't really tend to be the case. Being specifically proficient in one role is more valuable the vast majority of the time. This is why you have raid groups or arena teams. It's an MMO and it's often a group-wide effort. That flexibility your class boasts can really rarely be flexed. Aside from class-specific utility, of course, your Resto Druid in Classic wasn't about to hop into Cat and do anything meaningful, nor do any damage due to stacking bonus healing. Your Boomkin shifting into Burr to Taunt is missing the huge bonus Burrs get from armor scaling, as you're probably wearing a lot of cloth gear. The hybrid tax was hitting your Vault of Utility a little bit too hard. This was the idea that as your class could perform in multiple roles, that it could not be as strong as a class that could only do one, as it would risk only one class being viable for that role, which definitely didn't happen in Classic at all. So in TBC, whilst keeping much of their own unique utility, Druid's toolkit expanded greatly and each of their specializations started to shine on their own, not suffer as a result of the overall class identity. Okay, with that in mind, let's get into this. So what is new for Druid? A lot, like a really huge amount. I'll go over what's new baseline, and then we can get into the spec-specific stuff when we cover that soon, or I'll just end up repeating myself. Baseline, Druid's got some spells which have become iconic with the class over the years. Cyclone, an extremely versatile and powerful tool, which we can talk more about mostly for PvP. Lacerate for Burrs, a stacking bleed with a threat modifier, kind of like the Feral equivalent to Sunder Armor, in that it's stacked to 5. Whilst doing minor damage, it's just another button to press and makes your rotation a bit more interesting. Main for Cats, this new finishing move uses your combo points for an incapacitate effect. Unlike Gouge from Rogues though, it doesn't break from damage over time, only direct damage, so it can be a strong setup ability for a CC chain or a follow-up Cyclone. Druids got flying, of course. They can train flying for cheap at their class trainers as early as level 68, making them the ideal candidates for gatherers in the open world, and kind of impossible to take out in PvP unless you can stun lock them down. In a later patch, the epic flying variant was introduced through a long quest line. This wasn't 3 though, and you had to pay up the 5k for master flying before you could make a start on it, but it was well worth it, giving some nice idols, access to Anzu in Sethic Halls who can drop the Raven Lord, and an instant cast 280% flying speed. Very good. And for Restoration, Life Bloom, a hot that can be stacked up to 3 times in TBC, and when it's expired or it's dispelled, it gives a strong instant burst of healing, great for targets taking consistent damage like tanks, and offers dispel protection for other hots in PvP. Leveling wise, I'll keep it pretty short because there is a lot to talk about for the rest of the video. What made Druids good in Classic for leveling continues to make them good in TBC too. Feral will still be your go-to, and whilst Moonkin does get a lot of help from the talent reworks, a lot of those talents are reliant on item scaling at endgame, and as a fresh 60, or especially before that, you just aren't going to be seeing the benefits of them nearly as much. As a geared 60 Resto Druid though, it'll be boom or bust really, well, outside of dungeons that is. There is some hybrid PvP spec called Restokin I'll talk about later, which could be interesting for this actually. Despite getting flying early as well, Outland wasn't by and large designed with a notion that you will be flying, as we've seen with previous retail expansions. Sure, it can help with some verticality at times, but the game doesn't expect you to have flying until level 70. It's just a little bit of a druid bonus. So let's talk PvE and we'll get a bit more into the specializations. As with every druid video, there are 4 specs, so I'll do my best to cover everything. Let's start with the one I bet most people are curious about how it's changed, Boomkin. So in Classic, Boomies suffer from just about everything that can go wrong with a caster class. They have poor mana management, no hit talents, reliant on crit RNG to do damage. They can't use their dots because of the debuff cap, which is now 40 in TBC. They compete with other casters for BIS gear, they don't have a dedicated tier set, and well, their damage just isn't very good even if the stars align, quite literally, and you get very lucky. So you'll be glad to know the vast majority of this changes. Will you be top of the meters? Will people be saying we need more Boomkins for this raid? Will you be getting funneled all the top loot as a priority? No. Whilst the spec is massively improved, it's still more utility focused and middle of the road in damage. Spec-wise, Barkskin gets a very nice little rework to make it considerably better. Now 20% of all damage taken is reduced, the attack speed slow from Classic is gone, and it's usable whilst CC'd, all that on a 1-minute cooldown, one of the main reasons Druids are so good in PvP. Insect swarms move over from the resto tree to balance so they can actually cast it now. This also reduces their target's chance to hit by 2%. Here's an idea of what a PvE raid focus build would look like. A lot of talents have been consolidated, Starlight Wrath for casting speed, Celestial Focus for more PvP utility, Balance of Power is a nice hit chance talent which the Druids very much needed, Dream State, Lunar Guidance and Moonglow are all there to address scaling issues that the Boomkin had in Classic, though these can still crop up early on into the expansion. Improved Fairy Fire. If you thought melee started ringing when they didn't see a Fairy Fire up in Classic for 0.5 seconds, well, let's turn it up to 11 with this talent now providing a 3% ranged and melee hit chance on it, which is an extremely powerful debuff your whole raid can benefit from. You will definitely want to have this. Moonkin form got big buffs, 400% armor, which is now one beefy chicken boy, the crit aura buffed up from 3 to 5%, and for some reason you now get attack power and a chance to restore mana on melee, which I guess someone at Blizzard liked the idea you go and then just start smacking people about with your tendy arms. I don't know. Force of Nature not taken though? Well, see, Blizzard have this habit of giving Moonkin spells that are hard to control. Do you remember the early versions of Starfall? And Force of Nature just kind of go and do their own thing. There isn't a pet bar for them, so there could be a risk to chain pull or just cause general headaches. Maybe there will be some big brain who figures out how to get them to work through macros, which did happen with totems in Classic for a while. So you can see here why Boomy is a great class to bring. On top of Innovate, Rebirth, Off Heals, they now have a better spell crit aura, they reduce enemies' chance to hit and provide melee hit themselves. The thing is, and this will be the case with quite a few specs, you don't really need to bring more than one of them to get all the good stuff they bring. Utility spec, right? And there are quite a few we need one of these type specs in the game now. I can say the demand for laser chickens in your raid will definitely be there though in TBC. Moving on though, Feral DPS, the talent tree that packs enough points and punch to get 2 specializations out of it. How are the kitty cats looking over the other side of the Dark Portal? Well, similar to Classic in some ways, a specialization that needs a bit of extra effort to get the most out of it. Remember Wolf's Head Helm and power shifting? Yep, that is still a thing. The real simple explanation of this item combined with a Fiora talent, an exit and re-entering cat form between energy ticks is superior to just letting your energy regenerate naturally, at the expense of being a lot more mana intensive and requiring you to get that rhythm down. What about manual crowd pummeler though? Well, good news there at least. The on-use changed to 500 haste rating in TBC, whereas new toys that Ferals get, so this goes for tanks too, exceed what this weapon can offer, so Ferals rejoice, your days of Nomagun are officially over. Here is an example DPS spec. I've left 5 talent points out from Improved Mark of the Wild. Both your Boomies and Resto Druid will always have this talented, so you should be able to get out of the buff rotation. As for where you can put these points, it's up to you really. More chance to resist fears or stuns, better off heals, more CC, whatever you want really. Non-effect DPS, just your utility. As for the talents here, it's kind of like Moonkin, a lot of consolidation and streamlining to combine a cat and bear talents together. Leader of the pack is 5% melee crit now, with a little healing for your group on the improved version. Art of the Wild reworked to give more AP in cat instead of strength, and Mangle. There is a version of this for cat and for bear. Think of the cat version as your new replacement for claw, it's just a straight up upgrade in every sense. On top of increasing the damage the target takes from bleeds and shred by 30%, it's more of just a maintain buff in PvE, though if you have a Feral Tank, they should be doing this role for you, and you'd only really use it if you can't get behind the target to shred. Solid DPS if you put in the extra effort, bring that Druid utility to show, and a nice extra bit of crit for your group, that's Feral DPS. Which only makes sense to talk tank next. Here's a look at the talents, very similar to Cat you will see, only a few points moved into key rage generation or threat generation talents like Feral Instinct, Thick Hide, and Intensity. The Burr version of Mangle is the same debuff as Feral, but it's on a short cooldown and it hits like a truck. Believe me when I say if Burrs were the underdog tank in Classic, in TBC they are the alphas. This spec is totally insane. Its bonus armor goes up to 400% now, you get 25% more stamina from items, on top of Heart of the Wild that's 45% extra stam from items alone in Burr. No tank scales like a Feral Tank does, they are a wall of health and armor. Oh, and they're actually extremely agile. Druids started to literally become near untouchable by bosses as their dodge chance was in the high 80s or 90%. Even in lesser gear, they become crazy powerful very early on. Druid tanks scaled so well, Blizzard had to put an aura in the Sunwell so the bosses stood a chance at hitting them back. If that doesn't convince you about this spec, then I don't know what else to say. And that's even if a hit gets through, you're then hitting the highest health pool and the most armor. On the downside, Ferals don't really pack the cooldowns other tanks have at all. If something goes wrong, you're praying to RNG for dodges or that your healers can back you up. Either way though, expect a big surge in the number of Druid tanks you see in TBC. Which leaves us with Restoration, what I can think safely makes up the vast majority of the Druid player base at the moment. Now, two very important things change in TBC for Resto Druids that make such a huge difference to your playstyle. First of all, heal over times are no longer exclusive buffs, so two Druids can have two rejuvenations running on the same target. Secondly, with the world buff meta and consumable stacking nerfed, you can actually cast your heals over times without having your tanks raging at you that they're going to lose their Oni buff or something. As far as I know, the player buff cap of 32 is still there, but you're really going to have to try and go out of your way to hit that number. So here are some example talent trees. Now, you might have noticed for this one, I've just chucked points into everything that does something to your heals, and yeah, you're right. Strictly for PvE, there isn't really much we care about in the other talent trees at all. We have 7 points left here, where you can just put them wherever you want to, really. You can put them into balance, you can do a bit more DPS. You do get 1/3 of your healing as spell damage in TBC, by the way. Go for extra talents in Restoration, but there's nothing too interesting in the Feral tree. As for what's new for Restoration, not that much. It's just your playstyle that actually allows you to, well, play your class to its full potential. Gift of the Wild gets an icon, that's pretty exciting. I guess the big deal here is that similar to every other Druid spec now is you no longer get a chance to look at your tier gear and character model progression, instead you get to look at a tree. So tree is actually super powerful. Your heals on party members is increased by 25% of your total spirit, mana costs reduced by 20%, downside is you can only cast restoration stuff and your movement speed is reduced by 20%. Trees don't run very fast after all. Alternatively, just go full on pretend as though healing touch doesn't exist anymore and purely heal through your hots, bringing a fully upgraded Thorns and have more talents in the balance tree. Ignoring healing touch frees up 12 points to be spent elsewhere, and it lets other healers play whack-a-mole with the meters while just covering the raid in hots and dropping tree to add some DPS whenever you can. If you're Resto now and you love it, well, good news, it continues to be a strong choice. Which means it's time to talk about PvP. Now for this part we're going to largely be focusing on the arena. I feel that's the area of the game that most players will care about, but I'll give some brief mention to the other areas too. The short version is Feral and Moonkin are both quite underrepresented in arena in all brackets, apart from twos, as those specializations being played and geared purely for themselves, instead of a support tree for Restoration. Feral is somewhat lacking in the damage department until late game gear is available, though you could say much of the same for any melee class really. It has a narrow range of comps which it's regularly played in, most commonly seen in Feral Rogue in twos. They are forced into a choice too often of having to sit in bear to stand up to rogues or warriors, or constantly spam shifting to stay on casters, since they have no built-in slow baseline. Whilst by no means being a total write-off of a spec, you're really going to have to work hard to hit the higher rankings. Whilst in open world or battleground it's quite the opposite story. Flightform makes druids just in general incredibly obnoxious in the open world, it takes to outnumber a druid to beat them really. Battleground wise, what makes them good in Classic is still there. Depends how much you still like carrying flags, I guess. Also, free action potions become undispellable in a later TBC patch. As for Moonkins, they just struggle to do enough damage through their non-instant spells to provide a considerable threat, and they're very crit reliant to put out damage, which Resilience actively cuts down in power exponentially as the expansion progresses. Like Feral, they find it hard to actually play their class when put in arenas against some tougher opponents. Again, it'll be a tall order to hit high ratings as a Boomy. Restoration though, Resto is a different story. Pretty much everything goes right for Resto in TBC Arena. I'll bring up a spec and tell you why. So this is something along the line of what you'll be seeing for deep restoration in Arena. Along the line of its strengths, nearly everything you do is instant cast, meaning you stay mobile all the time, moving around pillars. Interrupts are rarely an issue for you. You're the hardest healer to lock down by an absolute mile with travel form. You can literally over quadruple your armor if melees ever start to train you just by pressing burr form, whilst your hots heal you back up. Predicting swaps and getting into a burr is a sign of a strong druid. Bark Skin can cover mistakes like a mini pain suppression. Your spells get a 30% reduced chance to be dispelled through the subtlety talent. This goes for offense and defensive spells. And yes, this works on Entangling Roots versus Gnome Escape Artist, by the way. You have 2 emergency heal instant cast buttons with Swiftmend and Nature's Swiftness, and this can also be used to hibernate enemy druids for an instant clone or even a root in a pinch. You have Cyclone, which renders the target immune and pauses all healing on them. You can also Cyclone big cooldowns just to disrupt the enemy players. You have an Interrupt in Feral Charge. Your PvP gloves reduce the casting time of Cyclone. Tauren have War Stomp into Cyclone. Nelves can Shadow Meld and Drink. You can shift into Form to avoid mana drains, whilst in Form you're immune to Sap and Polymorph. Basically, druids have a lot going right for them. There is also a Restokin build I mentioned early on. Here it is. The idea behind it is, instead of hopping into Burr for defense, why not just use Moonkin form instead and do some more damage? Remember, you get 1/3 of your spell damage from healing gear in TBC, so a Resto gear druid hopping into Burr is just purely for defense. You're really not going to be doing any damage, other than using it for bash or frenzied rejuvenation, maybe a demoralizing roar. Moonkin offers some offense on top of this, and that's what the build is. It sacrifices some strong restoration talents like Swiftmend and Natural Perfection to get better mana efficiency and overall damage through talents like Moonglow, Lunar Guidance and Dream State. Despite having more points in balance, you will still be gearing purely for Resto more or less. Don't let it fool you, it's just druids are so good they can get away with doing this. It's a bit like having Fury Prot in Classic at the moment. So that's PvP. Overall, you will see the vast majority of druids opting to heal. Sort of like Classic, but they'll be much stronger. Resto should be a serious consideration for any arena junkie, and is seen at the top levels of play in all arena brackets, and fits into a wide variety of different comps, usually seen with warriors, locks, mages, rogues, hunters, basically anything you want to play with it, to be honest. Which leaves us with tier gear. So this will be mainly PvE stuff, because the PvP tier up to Season 4 were just PvE recolors, and their set bonuses were always the same. It's just some resilience and some kind of ability modifier, as well as the glove bonus, of course, which I will cover in the PvP section, where it's notable just for the sake of time. The good news for tier sets in TBC is that each specialization gets one. Whilst they won't always be your best in slot, TBC definitely has some great looking sets, which may be kind of lost on druids as you're looking at your form, but it's better than only having one for restoration, right? Each tier is earned through tokens, just like how it is with Nax Rammus gear, has 5 pieces overall, and have a 2 and a 4 set bonus, apart from tier 6, which has boots, belts and wrists added in the Sunwell. There's no additional set bonuses though. There are also dungeon sets, but I'll try and only bring them up when they're really relevant. Tier 4 is the Malorn set from Karazhan and Magtheridon and Gruul's Lair. So for the Feral sets, and this goes for TBC gear in general, they have a bunch of extra armor on them, more so than your average leather items, once again reinforcing how good Burrs are. The 2 set is some more resources, very solid. The 4 set is exceptionally good for Burrs. Expect this tier to be funneled to the Ferals early. The Cat DPS variant is pretty negligible. Resto, it's more mana and shorter cooldown on Nature's Swiftness. That's okay, not too much to add there. Balance, more mana efficiency. They do struggle with mana early on in TBC. Depends how long fights are, as for how relevant this ends up being. Tier 5, Nordrassil from Serpent Shrine Cavern and Tempest Keep. I don't know if I like this set more or Tier 6. Probably this one. The 2 set for Feral is, it's not bad, it's just more of a solo play, or maybe I could see it in PvP as well. It's only sacrificing 2 resilience slots, so maybe there's something there. Forset is more damage on your main abilities. Okay, cool. Restoration, more regrowth duration and bigger life bloom pops. The thing is, you don't really tend to use regrowth because it's super mana intensive and you want to keep life bloom rolling at 3 stacks normally, so not sure how good this is. Balance, the mana reduction on regrowth here is actually significant. It's about 70% of the spell cost. So like the Feral set for this tier, but more of a solo play PvP option once again. 10% Starfire damage, very nice actually. You're always at least going to have Insect Swarm rolling, so not that bad at all. Tier 6 from Black Temple, Mount Hyjal, and the boots, belt, and wrists are from Sunwell. The 2 set for Feral, you're pressing Shred as a cat. You're almost for certain gonna have a Feral Tank applying Mangle, unless you can't get behind the target I suppose. More threat for Bear though, you'll love to see it. Some extra damage from the 4 set, just not really on the most impactful abilities. Restoration, smaller cooldown on Swift Mend. Hopefully you shouldn't be needing this button on cooldown, but some more bosses do hit like trucks, so it might be solid. And more Healing Touch bonus on the 4 set. We saw a talent build for Resto that pretends Healing Touch doesn't exist, well, outside of Nature Swiftness, so I'm guessing this one isn't too exciting. Finally, Balance, more duration on Moonfire, which should stack up nicely with the talents to improve this ability, and extra crit on Starfire, and Balance is all about crit, so looks decent. So, Druid. Is it any better now? Well, I kind of gave it away like 5 seconds after the intro, but yes, they are considerably better than they ever were in Classic, in every single role. Whilst not coming into their stride as a top tier DPS class just yet, your raid leader has a much more compelling set of reasons to want all of those specializations around in their raid. Bear tanks are what warriors are to Classic, just overall extremely good. They struggle a little on AoE, not gonna lie, but as an off tank they're going to do the most damage by far, and their single target threat and survivability are top tier. Resto still has its spot in PvE and becomes arguably the best PvP healer in the game for arena content. I'd expect to see a much wider variety of druids in TBC, and for their place in the game to amount to much more than a fairy fire bot and a flag carrier. I hope I did you druids justice here. Please do let me know if there is anything important that you would have added below. These videos are always an incredible amount of information to cover and condense, but I want to do the best job I can providing a fair and honest overview to give you a reasonable expectation of the class moving forwards. I'll try and add a poll later on down the line so you guys can say what you'd like to see next. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you in the next one very soon.